Welcome to part 3 of our series on religious pluralism in Gauḍīya Vedānta. This is the third and last part of this video accompanying original articles that have been published in my website, swamipadmanabha.com. And also the link to the article is in the description of this video in case you want to read it fully with all the details. This is just a summarized version of it in case you don't have the time to go through the detailed article. So this last and third part is titled, Is Brahman lesser than Bhagavan or full in a different way? So in the first part, we have explored polymorphic monotheism and how the personal God can have many faces. And in part 2, last week, we have explored the relation between the personal and the impersonal dimension and the ultimate realization and how there is place for both. But then now comes this question, okay, while Gauḍīya Vedānta may acknowledge both the existence of the personal and the impersonal, is there a hierarchy created between the two? So actually, the main reason for me to write all the series of articles and do these videos originally started with a conversation I had with Swami Medhananda from the Ramakrishna Mission, with whom I had the chance of engaging with in conversation in one of my episodes in my Free Radical podcast, where we talked actually about this very topic. This is basically an expansion of that, and he himself in that conversation invited me to write a piece on religious pluralism in Gauḍīya Vedānta. So credit goes to him because of that. And he wrote an article in this connection that was published in a particular book on different topics connected to Vaishnavism, where he presents an interesting critique to Gauḍīya Vedanta, mentioning that we teach an asymmetrical ontological dependence between Brahman and Bhagavan. In other words, there's no a mutual dependence, but it's an asymmetrical ontological dependence, not a mutual ontological dependence. Not that Brahman and Bhagavan coexist as two faces of the same absolute, but there's an asymmetrical, there's a hierarchical difference between Brahman and Bhagavan, or at least that seems to be the case. So that was the presentation of Swami Medhananda. We engaged in conversation in my podcast. He suggested me to continue expanding the conversation in a series of articles, which I'm doing here, along with these videos. Looking forward to also his reply and continue to engage in conversation in healthy exchange of ideas with him and other representatives of different schools. So he will make that point, making the case that on the side of Gauḍīya Vedanta, there's still some hierarchy, while in the case of one of his teachers, Sri Ramakrishna, there is an ontological mutual dependence, a parity of personal and impersonal without any hierarchy whatsoever between the two. So this part is an answer to that, an expanded answer to that, again, an elaboration of some of the main points I mentioned to Swami Medhananda in our podcast. So, of course, in my article that this video is in a short summary of, I referred to abundant sections of scripture with, of course, we have sections in our tradition which downplay liberation altogether, both personal and impersonal. That's well known from Gauḍīya Vedanta. Moksha Lagut agreed. We don't care for moksha, with all respect for Moksha Devi. It's not an interest of us because, as I said before, bhakti for us is the means and the goal. So we are already doing what we want to do forever. So liberation stopped being an issue for us. And particularly in connection to impersonal liberation, we will find sections in tradition like in Rupa Goswami's Padyavali and in many other sections, to be honest, where impersonal liberation is described as undesired by bhaktas, as an obstacle to service, which again doesn't necessarily need to be taken personally as a critique, ontological critique to impersonal liberation, but just from the perspective of someone who pursues a personal loving connection with Bhagavan. Yes, an impersonal form of non-differentiated merging will get in the way of a radically personal connection with the divine. So in texts like Padyavali, we'll find an entire section criticizing moksha, but also we'll find verses in that same work, like verse 77, that is somehow honoring nirguna realization, impersonal realization, addressing those who have attained that or pursued that as sages. as persons worthy of our respect. But it's just that a devotee or a bhakta or a personal lover of God, so to say, simply prefers, let's say, the beloved's face rather than formless light. It's a matter of personal taste. But we are not, that's how I begin my article. We are not canceling or downplaying that altogether. Now, someone could say, but Swami, in the Bhagavad Gita, we find so many verses that are clearly indicating a personalistic view, bhakti emphasized perspective, eternal individuality. Some of the verses we quoted before, 212, verse 647, Krishna saying, from all yogis, the highest is my bhakta, basically. Those who think that I was impersonal and then I became impersonal, those are fools. Those who deride me in my human form, there are mudas, there are ignorance. 724, 911, verses in the Gita. Chapter 12, the first verse of the 12th chapter, Arjuna asking Krishna, from the impersonal and the personal, who is better? A clearly hierarchical question. And Krishna basically extols the glory of his devotees, saying the path of impersonal realization is very hard to tread. Or Brahman hi pratishtaham, famous line, chapter 14, verse 27. Krishna, personal God, Bhagavan saying, I am the basis, the foundation, the shelter of Brahman. So all that can take us to say it's very clear that there is a hierarchy not proposed by Gauḍīya Vedanta, but embedded in the scripture, like scriptures that are foundational to Advaita Vedanta and Gauḍīya Vedanta, like the Bhagavad Gita. But of course, no, don't put pause in the video right now. We can also find many verses in the Bhagavad Gita which seem to indicate not the opposite, but the alternative of an emphasis on the impersonal. Verse 424, Brahmarpanam Brahmaha, like everything is Brahman. Vasudeva Sarvamiti, everything is Vasudeva, everything is the divine. Chapter 8, verse 3, 719. I mean, I'm giving you some reference. You please do your homework and check them at home. Verse speaking about entering in me, merging in me. So at the end of the day, we can make a very serious case for any of these two possibilities, personal and impersonal. So the takeaway is scripture accommodates multiple destinies. Please, guys, let's be at peace with one another. And readers will also reinterpret them according to their orientation. I'm sure all these verses that emphasize bhakti will be read by a follower of Sankara in certain way, interpret them in certain way that keeps Gyan and Mukti and impersonal realization on its pedestal. And similarly, those verses of the Bhagavad Gita, which seem to indicate clear, overt, impersonal emphasis, will be read by a bhakta through their devotional lenses. And there's place for that. That's a genuine hermeneutical approach. And then in my article, I refer from the Bhagavad Gita, go to the Bhagavad Purana, and similarly mention how, despite, of course, the obvious devotional nature, personalistic, radically personal nature of the Bhagavad, there are clear indications of the possibility of impersonal liberation. Now, in the 28th chapter of the third canto, Kapila, Dev clearly outlines that. We have very clearly Gyan-oriented chapters, Mukti-oriented chapters in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, chapter 28, the 12th canto, chapter 5. Even at the very end, almost one of the last verses of the Bhagavad Purana says Kaivalya Prayojanam. The whole goal of this work is Kaivalyam, which again generally can be understood as impersonal liberation, though through Gaudiya hermeneutics we will read this merging as intimacy, this oneness as oneness in love, not a denial of personhood. But still, again, Advaita Vedantists give Bhagavad Saptaha. They do this 7-day recital of the Bhagavatam, explained through impersonal lenses. It's possible. It may not be our preferred approach, but the text lends itself for that reading. Again, Shastra is described sometimes as a desire tree, which will satisfy different desires according to our approach. So from there we can go for a moment to Ramakrishna, who is the main basically figure along with Swami Vivekananda, the Ramakrishna Mission. And Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna is very famous for his pluralism, at times favoring bhakti, and I share quotes in my article about that, but also at the same time in other sections mentioning impersonalism, Advaita Vedanta. He's known for having embrace different paths, experience the goals of different paths, and concluding they are all pointing to the same reality. Of course, in that connection, and I mentioned that in my article, if Ramakrishna experienced the impersonal realization, I have no problem acknowledging that, but I would say that wouldn't be exactly in the way as Shankaracharya describes it when we read him literally, because by nature, the way Shankara describes Advaita Vedanta is exclusivistic of any other possibility that will erase any other path, basically. So in that sense, we could say Ramakrishna's approach aligns in many ways with the Bheda perspective. He will give the examples of Brahman and Shakti, fire and the power to burn, acknowledging both personal and impersonal, in his case, without any type of hierarchy. And this article, I'm trying to show that we Gauḍīyas, while we may seem to present a hierarchy, that's from a very particular place, as I will do in a moment, which is through the lenses of rasa. Our main glasses to approach reality, so to say, is rasa-vicāra. Discernment according to rasa, according to the relish of sacred devotional rapture, so to say. In that sense, we privilege Bhagavan. We privilege the personal God because that's what facilitates the experience of bhakti rasa. The Absolute is described as rasa in the Taittiriya Upanishad, raso vai saha. So rasa-vicāra is, again, the consideration according to relational bliss, to the joy, the ananda that comes in loving interaction. And that's our yardstick, let's put it that way. That's the barometer. That's the measuring stick through which we speak about things, because that's our inclination. Personal inclination. Again, not saying for everyone it has to be the same way. Subjectively, we long for loving relational rapture with the personal divine. So we realize, we see reality, and many sections of the scriptures and the teachings of our masters are from that perspective. There is tattva-vicāra, which is ontology, how to see reality purely from an ontological lenses. There is rasa-vicāra, how to approach reality from the lenses of, again, aesthetic relational bliss. Those are not, they are related, but they're not entirely the same. So, and we find that, again, as I say, rasa, the Absolute is described as rasa in the Upanishads. Rupa Goswami elaborates on that line, raso vai saha rasam hyevayan labdhanandi bhavati, in his concept of Akila Rasamrita Murti. Krishna is the embodiment of all rasas in his Bhakti Rasa Amrita Sindhu. So for us, Brahman is ultimately read in that way, as constantly expanding in rasa. That's for us the meaning of the word Brahman, coming from the Sanskrit root brim, which basically, to make a play of words in English, means the Absolute who is brimming with expansiveness and growth in relational bliss. So from the perspective of rasa, again, the impersonal divine is partial or is not facilitating the full experience that the personal divine facilitates in terms of relational bliss, love, fullness. So that's our value orientation, if we want to use another contemporary terms, value orientation. Another word that could replace rasa will be ananda. Srila Jiva Goswami resorts to this yardstick, so to say, his Bhagavad Sandarbha. Ananda being like the substantive, if we want to speak in terms of grammar, and Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan are modalities of that bliss. So it's all to be seen according to different degrees of intensity of ananda. So it's not that Brahman is false or it's even inferior, it's a different mode. But Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Gaudiya Vedanta prioritizes the mode that yields the maximum relational ananda. Brahman provides a particular type of ananda which is not necessarily relational, but is undifferentiated. And I argue in my article, as we will make a case for Bhagavan, the personal God, being the highest in terms of facilitating the experience of relational bliss, we could make a similar case for the impersonal Absolute Brahman as being the highest in terms of facilitating the impersonal, undifferentiated form of bliss and ananda. But it's just that Gauḍīya Vedanta is biased in a sacred way towards that relational loving approach to reality, rasa-vicāra. In fact, interestingly enough, not only this happens in connection between Bhagavan and Brahman, personal and impersonal, but in our tradition we'll have a whole uh, gradation in terms of forms of the personal divine. For example, we have Krishna and Narayan, two forms of the same personal God, but we'll make our case to argue Krishna is higher, quote unquote, than Narayan in terms of the degree of rasa that can be experienced in connection to him. In tattva, they are the same. In ontological truth, they are non-different, the same person. There is no hierarchy, no distinction. But from the rasa-vicāra, from the perspective discernment of sacred aesthetic bliss, Krishna has some qualities that Narayan lacks. Rupa Goswami will make that case in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And even on top of that, there are differences made among different forms of Krishna. Rupa Goswami makes the same case. He says Krishna in Dwarka is Purna, complete. Krishna in Mathura is Purnatara, more complete. Krishna in Vrindavan is Purnatama, most complete. Because of the degree of intimacy and sweetness, and how much rasa can be derived with that particular expression of the absolute. But again, it's all from the lens of rasa. It's not an ontological statement, because in ontological terms, Krishna, one Krishna and the other Krishna, Mathuresh, Dwarkesh, Braja Krishna, they are the same person. Between Krishna and Narayan, they are the same. Between Bhagavan and Brahman, they are the same ontologically. They are the same Advai Gyan, same non-dual consciousness expressing in different ways. But from the rasa hierarchy, rasa perspective, yeah, each devotee will have a particular experience and they will find their experience the best. Now, in terms of rasa, sometimes I use the example of sweetness to describe this idea of rasa or ananda. There may be an objectively provable experience of this, the highest sweetness in connection to God, but not everyone may like sweet that much. I can tell you mango is the sweetest fruit of all, and you can tell me yes, but banana is my favorite fruit, and that's fine. That doesn't do away with the fact that mango is the sweetest fruit, but that doesn't do away with the fact that your favorite fruit is some other one, and that's perfect for you. So in the same way, from the perspective of Ananda, Rasa, sweetness, we will make a case in Gauḍīya Vedānta for this particular, not only Bhagavan as we are seeing, but specific forms of Bhagavan as being higher than others, but all in terms of how much rasa can be derived in terms of relational bliss. But at the same time, from the perspective of tattva vichar, ontological consideration, there's equality. There's an actual ontological mutual dependence. And that's my difference of opinion with Swami Medhananda that I share with him in our podcast, that I do not consider we are positing an ontological asymmetrical dependence in terms of tattva, because he uses the word ontological and tattva has to do ontology, but the asymmetry or the hierarchy or the differences in terms of rasa vichar. Because from tattva, we are talking about the non-dual substance, how much you can create hierarchies in non-dual ultimate reality, how much we can say worse and better in the absolute realm. So these are complementary phases and different experiences of the same non-dual reality. Brahman facilitating undifferentiated, non-relational bliss, if we want to call it that way, while Bhagavan facilitating different degrees in its different forms of differentiated relational loving bliss. Intimate play, lila, etc. Complementary phases of the Advai Tattva, Advai Tattva, non-dual reality. And there is a point, just to reach the conclusion of this presentation, that Swami Medhananda shares at the end of his own article, which he mentions, we can easily become proud, we can fall into superiority, religious superiority complex, thinking, my God is the highest, Bhagavan is higher than Brahman, we are better, they are worse. I absolutely agree with that. But also I make the point, pride appears in any camp. It's so easy to become proud for any reason. So I can embrace bhakti triumphalism, devotion is the best for everyone, I'm higher. Or I can also become proud thinking my school is the most broad, accommodating one than others. So it's an equally sobering and humbling warning to all of us not to fall in any of that. But I'm taking personally, yes. And that's why I'm making all this series of videos and articles, just to make the clear, how to say, exposition that though, despite we may be having our particular affinity, that has to happen in a way that is equally respectful and honoring of other expressions and approaches to the absolute. So the proper Gaudiya reading is not a superiority complex. It may be there may be it's preferential without sectarian denial, without downplaying, without bullying other traditions, etc. So, of course, I'm giving a summary here because the third article actually is the largest of all. Each article is a little larger than the other ones, and you can find links to each article in the description to each video. But I like to conclude with a beautiful metaphor that Swami Medhananda quotes, given by Ramakrishna, which is this one of the animal. Different people go into a forest and seeing the same one animal of one color. Say, oh, I saw this animal near to this tree was red. Another person say, I went to that same tree the next day, it was white. I went to the same tree the next day, it was blue. And they're all fighting with one another about which color was the animal. And there's a person who lives in the tree and says, no, I know that animal. And the animal is a chameleon. So you are seeing the chameleon in different colors, but actually it's the same entity expressed in different faces. So he uses this analogy to speak about the absolute without color, transparent, if you will, is Brahman, different colors, different forms of the absolute. So we don't need to be fighting about that. Our tradition will give a similar example of a jewel that from different directions will reflect different colors, but reflecting the same light. So, conclusion to this third part, Brahman is not lesser than Bhagavan ontologically. It is full in a different way. It facilitates a unique experience that while it may not be the preferable choice of a Gaudiya Vedanta, is valid, sustainable, pursuable for eternity. And we can appreciate that, and we can support those who are looking for that from a genuine place, and even be inspired by the sincerity of those pursuing that path, as we have shown in different articles in the previous series of videos. Gaudiya Vaishnavas, Gaudiya Vedanta will privilege Bhagavan from the rasa-vicāra, from the lenses of sacred relational bliss, by the measure of rasa, ananda, sweetness, intimacy, you name it, but at the same time affirming Brahman as eternal, valid attainment within the one non-dual absolute. So these are a few reflections in relation to this third article that I've written, but in the context of the bigger series on religious pluralism in Gaudiya Vedanta, which is offered to the Gaudiya community and beyond the Gaudiya Vaishnava community in the spirit of service, and the spirit of pluralism, and the spirit of properly honoring acintya-bhedābheda, the unity and diversity is so crucial, so essential to this particular tradition and its founder, Śrī Caitanya. So I hope it has rendered some purpose and is nourishing your own journey. Thank you so much for accompanying me on this journey. Looking forward to further sharing in the future. Be well.